staring us in the face. Because in a magic eye picture, the cup or flower is distributed throughout the mesh of fuzzy little patches of the image. The object is already there. Before we look at it, global warming is not a function of our measuring devices, yet because it's distributed across the biosphere and beyond, it's very hard to see as a unique entity, and yet there it is, raining on us, burning down on us, quaking the earth, spawning gigantic hurricanes. So in some deeply rigorous sense, hyperobjects and objects in general infested human art forever. All that has happened is that humans have dropped something, a concept that their art is by them, for them, about them. Non-humans are responsible for the next great moment in art history. The human mist evaporates, leaving behind what is real, entities, objects, strange strangers, without a totalizing context, without a world, without nature, all because of ecological awareness. What does this mean? This art by, for, and about non-humans, art that includes non-humans for sure, but in a far wider configuration space. It's almost like a return to the Platonic notion of art as demonic inspiration, like a regression from the last 2,000 years of Western art history. The end of progress, but in another way we could read the evaporation of the human mist as a step beyond the story of art so beautifully told by Hegel. In this story, art has three phases, which makes art in the time of hyperobjects the fourth phase. Phase 1, symbolic art. Now here's Hegel's view, is that art develops according to the interplay between what we know and what objects are, precisely those objects that constitute art. Art materials. The interplay then is a dance between humans and non-humans. It's true that Hegel's history does have its many quirks and charms, not the least being an insufferable imperialist sense of manifest destiny in which Western art and religion play the central role. However, since it is precisely against Western fantasies of mastery and exception that hyperobjects exert their overwhelming powers, among other things such as Pacific Islands flooded by global warming, it seems appropriate to trace Hegel's narrative, especially since we're going to kick it away in the end, or rather since hyperobjects do. Phase 1 of the dance between non-humans and humans is when humans see the non-humans as overwhelming them in another sense, argues Hegel, not because they understand them, but because they don't. Non-humans seem to possess godlike powers. Stones speak. The heavens shape human destiny. Symbolic art is Hegel's term for art in this phase. This kind of art shows how objects tower above human comprehension and mastery. So even early Christian art, such as a Gothic cathedral, is awe-inspiringly huge and terrifyingly magnificent, such that human worship just bows down before it. This is not just the age of indigenous fetishism, so-called, but also the European Dark Ages. Phase 2, classical art. There then comes a sweet spot in which human comprehension is just enough to understand some of the true inner nature of objects, but not everything. In this sweet spot, a harmony emerges that a later age can only regard as an illusion. Humans and non-humans meet each other halfway, generating all kinds of beautiful machinery. This is why Haydn or Mozart sound so sweet, argues Hegel. The non-human no longer towers over the human, but the human doesn't fully comprehend the depths of its own inner space. We shall find this phase is stunningly short-lived compared with phases 1 and 3. Phase 3, romantic art. Now, Hegel being Hegel is telling this story from the standpoint of the human comprehension of the absolute. I'm ignoring the absolute for reasons I think should be clear. I'm a realist, not an idealist. Yet I think that the one-way street quality of Hegel's story is important. It's hard to unknow what you know. As a matter of fact, it's downright impossible. So this is a story about evolving human understanding, though it's not a progression in my view. It doesn't have a telos or endpoint. For Hegel, the story does indeed have an endpoint. This would be the Romantic period, Hegel's own. In this period, humans recognize the infinite depths of their inner space for the first time. It becomes radically impossible to embody this inner space in any non-human entity, so romantic art must talk about the stunning failure to embody the inner space in outer things. Yet by failing this way, art ironically succeeds to talk about the inner space. Isn't the inner space precisely what can't be embodied? So the job of art is to fail beautifully, or rather sublimely. A truly Christian art is now possible because art can now express the ironic gap between the divine idea and fallen human flesh, embodied in the incarnation of Christ. So oddly medieval cathedrals are less Christian than a Beethoven string quartet. The story of this failure is recorded in the history of the avant-garde, which is also bound up with the history of the failure to change the objective social conditions of capitalism. The long march of the isms is the march of one form of romanticism after another, At the same time, art realizes that philosophy is now its big brother. At the very least, art needs manifestos and statements of purpose, philosophical exploration and justification because of its failure. The more we know more than we can embody, and we can't put the genie back in the bottle. So the default position of Romanticism, which I believe has been going on from about 1776 to about last week, is a kind of irony. Irony being the aesthetic exploitation of gaps, or gapsploitation to be short. My class and I came up with this term because we were fed up with the technical definition, my definition, which is the exploitation, the aesthetic exploitation of a gap between 1 plus n levels of signification. I know this is a big mouthful, but it's terribly important to hold it in mind, because irony means that more than one thing is in the vicinity. Irony is the echo of a mysterious presence. For there to be irony, something must already be there. We can perhaps see this phenomenon, in this phenomenon of irony, stemming from an awareness of 1 plus n levels, the seeds of Romanticism's dissolution, but perhaps this knowledge is only available to us now, in the time of hyperobjects. Remember the discussion of interobjectivity. Remember how hyperobjects point out how things share a weird kind of central space in which everything is entangled. When you encounter a phenomenon in this central space, 1 plus n entities are withdrawn in order for this encounter to take place. What does this say about the central space of art, humans, and non-humans? Well, as phase 3 continues, art becomes increasingly abstract and increasingly strident. First, human inner space, subjectivity, is liberated from sensuous appearance. Then this inner space is encapsulated as the inner spaces of characters in realist fiction. Then the realist narrator collapses, and we readers are led to encounter more nakedly the mysterious human inner space in naturalism. Then interior monologues develop, and narrative almost collapses into drama.